Brian used to ring a bell, didn't he, in Parliament Square, and the MPs got very annoyed hearing that bell during their debates. So they sent the police to stop him, and the police took his bell away and took the clapper out of it and handed it back to him. Today we're here to put the clapper back in that bell. My friend Johnny Flynn is here to sing us a song. Want me to hold that up?
No, it's just in case. I think do it for a while. It's fine. Dumbo's feather.
Yeah, it's like Marlon Brando. That's the first time I've been compared to Marlon Brando. It's very nice.
This is a song originally written for Edward Thomas, a poet who died at the dawn of the Battle of Arras in World War I. He's a nature poet, and he's known as a war poet, but the vast majority of his poetry is about his living, his life, and the trees and the place he lived. And there's a pub that he used to drink at in the village where he lived called the Pub with No Name, and there's still no sign in the pub sign, and this is called The Song with No Name.
Oh, the pace of my place to my lifted foot, the breath in my lungs, to my lips, my tongue spoke back to the trees, to the ease of my heartbeat down with the rain down again, and I trod with an ache for the ones who walk before me, joy for the ones who walk beside me. As I search for the solace the hills might give me, heavy the tread of the dead on the way, and the path and the rain and the sun won't gleam, and the ground is made of death and decay, and an echo of the ones who walk before me, joy for the one who walk beside me. And the beaches are lifting me, ashes are reaching me, wind is holding me, time is folding me under the tree, down through the lee and on to the path that you came to that day. My heartbeat quickens my breath, it deepens my footfall, falters your memory soul to the wound of calling your name. It's balm to the rain, I see you in forest dreams. Oh, the distance gives the ask its answer. I rise up tired but continue my journey. There's a light in the window, the first star is here. I find just enough peace to make my way home with sadness for the ones walk before me, joy for the ones who walk beside me.
Johnny Flynn. Beautiful line. I found just enough peace to walk home with. Let's hope that's what we walk home with today. I was walking in a field yesterday in Warwickshire and looking at the beautiful earth in the spring season. And a friend who was walking with me said, yes, of course, we're a part of the earth as much as the animals and the plants and the rocks, the minerals, the fire, the water, the air. We're not separable other than in man's mind from the earth. But he said we're also a part of the sun, which has blessed us today, hasn't it? Because of Brian, exactly. And I said, how are we a part of the sun? And he said, well, the scientists believe that all the planets were at one time a part of the sun and exploded off. So behind this connection to the earth, we are also, each one of us, a part of that, of the sun. Brian's earthly, physical triumph was so remarkable that it moved us, all of us, to come today and move many people in the nation. How do you stand in Parliament Square with the traffic racing by you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, from the 2nd of June 2001 until his death, pretty much? I think it's the 28th of June, am I correct? 2011. How did he do that? The physical strength and perseverance and endurance is soldier-like, isn't it? And indeed, he was a soldier in my mind, a soldier for peace, as I'm sure all soldiers, believe they are. That physical endurance was felt sharply, of course, by him, but as sharply by his family. And we're so honored to have you here today, Rob and Peter and Maria, 3 of Brian's 7 children, and 2 lovely grandchildren, to be with us today in our celebration and honoring of Brian. Honor to you. Peter wrote, this is a wonderful book, by the way, that Richard Keith Wolf has put together. I think we have copies in the building opposite with images and other things about Brian, which you can obtain. Peter writes here about his dad's peace campaign. More than just a series of banners and placards, he committed nearly a decade of his life to a cause so distantly removed from the, quote, here and now consumer culture that is pressed into our consciousness at every possible opportunity. He gathered facts, figures, and real-life stories from the many people he met on Parliament Square pavement and displayed it for all who cared to see. At first thought maybe far off and irrelevant stories, until you accept that abuses of power and privilege are being committed still in our names and hidden from us all. Dad fought vehemently for peace and for freedom of speech and the right to protest, all of which have been eroded since his passing.
Thank you, Brian.
So his physical bravery was struck, his earthly sense. But what part of us is the sun then, coming back to the comments from my friend? What part of us goes back to an older connection to a heavenly body? I like to think of it as our consciousness, the sun. That it enables us to see things, compare things, look at the world, be conscious of what's going on, and even at nighttime, it reflects its light via the moon and via our dreams. So it's a fiery part of us, our conscience, the light of fire. And perhaps the most fiery element of that sun-like part of us is our conscience. Is when we've looked at things clearly in the light of our consciousness and we've decided something is right and something is wrong. It may begin as a quiet feeling. It may then take shape in the mind as a thought. All of us have it. All of us this morning could have stayed in bed, but have come out and acted on our feelings and our thoughts of conscience. And I take goodness to be love in action. It's good to feel love in your heart. It's good to think loving thoughts, but to put it into action selflessly, as this man, Brian Hoare, did. That's the remarkable example. Not just the physical, but the sense of conscience. He walked into Parliament Square on the 2nd of June in 2001. Did he intend to stay? No, Peter's shaking his head. It came to him like a ray of sunlight that I can't leave this. I can't leave this place until we stop killing kids to resolve our adult conflicts. He stayed that day, he stayed that week, he stayed that month, he stayed that year. He must have come to know exactly where the sun rose in Parliament Square on Midsummer's Day, and where it rose on Midwinter's Day, which must have been as much of a delight to him as to farmers or ancient civilizations, that the days would grow longer again. He inspired many of us. One of his great friends was a man called Michael Culver, whose son is here today. And Michael would make him t-shirts and posters and placards, always in red and black and white. This is one he made for him. It lists some of the countries the USA has bombed since 1945.
Shame on United States! Shame!
Just some of them. Michael wrote these words in the book. Brian was an extremely brave man, deeply religious, and utterly determined to condemn the criminality of the UK's invasion and poisoning of Iraq. We had both seen the horrific photos of Iraqi infants born at Fallujah, resembling some revolting experiment by Joseph Mengele, caused without question by depleted uranium. And both of us knew that, hopeless as it might probably be, we had to oppose this genocide. Brian decided to sit down on the pavement in Parliament Square and refused to move for almost 10 years until his death. I, lacking his strength and fortitude, helped as best I could, making banners and trying to join him 2 or 3 times a week. Brian, whom most of the passing traffic dismissed as a crank, was a remarkably knowledgeable man and widely travelled. He had been to Cambodia and had seen the results of Thatcher's SAS assistance to Pol Pot's insanity. Brian's father had been among some of the first troops into the concentration camps at the end of World War II, and much later committed suicide by hanging himself. I'm quite sure that Brian's father would have been extremely proud of his son's extraordinary protest. So this was a personal protest, as well as a national and international protest felt by this man. I want to invite onto the stage now Michael's widow, as Michael sadly passed away 2 years ago, Amanda Ward, who, inspired also by Brian, has made the sculpture, the bronze maquette it's called, that we're about to unveil on the wall there.
My name is Amanda Ward Culver. I'm a sculptor from southwest London. I made this sculpture, this maquette of Brian Hoare, 13 years ago, actually, when a year before he died, when he was on crutches from basically police aggression, stranger aggression, and living in a very hostile environment. He was there to remind politicians of the disastrous consequences of the Iraq War. I would like to just thank Nick and Sarah Wood, who Nick and Sarah Wood, who were essential in providing funds to make a full-size statue to go in Parliament Square. But on consulting Westminster Council Planning Department, they said that the chances of having a full-size statue of Brian near Churchill were very, very slim. So that didn't happen. But then also I'd like to thank Caroline Lucas, who did her best to help us put on an exhibition in the House of Commons of Brian's statue, along with photographs of Brian's peace camp taken by Richard Keith Wolfe. But unfortunately that didn't happen because the powers that be decided it was too contentious. So then Mark Rylance had the idea, along with Jenny Tiramani, who owns the School of Historical Dress, to put it on the wall facing the Imperial War Museum. And that went ahead and has now happened. They've made it happen. I can't thank them enough, actually, for the amount of work they put into it, and perseverance to get it done. And this day has finally arrived. It was a huge privilege to make a representation of Brian. His commitment and courage were inspiring, really. But the reality is that actually I made this statue for my husband, my late husband, Michael Culver, who supported him constantly throughout the 10 years, providing him with T-shirts, solidarity, and banners. And I would just say that I think that Brian would approve of this symbolic position that he's in, facing the Imperial War Museum, which I hope that has the history of war, but not just war, but peace as well. I think that's all I can say.
Well done.
Hooray for Amanda. Pardon me, I'm a bit discombobulated these days. She's right, it's taken an enormous amount of work. A number of years, I can't remember how many years. Most of it volunteer work. Incredible volunteers from the School of Historical Dress. And many, many donors. I think 1,000 people raised the initial £20,000. 1,000 donors, people contributing £1, £100, £20, each one invaluable. Others contributed £5,000 or £10,000, but the conscience cannot be measured with numbers, can it? Each one of us did what we can, and I think it's been about 50,000 that's been donated to enable this, to enable a safe railing and the beautiful statue you're about to give. As well as the Imperial War Museum being a marvelous dance partner, shall we say, for Brian as we go forward. And they have done some wonderful things, the Imperial War Museum. That sounds very patronizing, doesn't it? They've done a wonderful exhibition about peacemakers, and it's important that we remember war. I'm not sure we should celebrate it, but it's important to remember it. Our hope is that the busloads of children that come by will also notice this man calling from across the street, "Stop killing the kids." And be aware of the many, many people who work for peace in this country. The building itself is a wonderful location as well. It was the Royal South London Dispensary for the Working Poor. That's what it was built as. The Royal South London Dispensary for the Working Poor. Ironic, as my friend said to me this morning, given the fact that so many of the working are poor today, still food bank poor. It became part of the Bethlehem Hospital, because as I expect you know, this was once a mental hospital, Bethlehem. And it became a part of that institution in August 1918 as the Hospital for Nervous Diseases. It was one of the first mental health outpatients departments in our country. So soldiers who were suffering from shell shock, now known as PTSD, were treated and cared for in the building where Brian will stand. Jenny has found a number of different reports from the time of the patients there, and I have this one to represent those poor people. This is July 8th, 1924, a man called Theobald Arthur. I imagine that's Arthur Theobald. Age 32. He lived at 235 Thornton Road, Croydon. He was male. He was uninsured. It has been sent, this report, from the Ministry of Pensions. His family history, good. His previous history, a professional footballer before the war and doing well. Wounded in 1916 at the Somme in the head and treated there at Rouen. At present, he's working with his father in a butcher's shop, but he now feels depressed, gets fits of shaking and giddiness, especially in the street. He suffers from headaches and has quite lost confidence in himself. When I imagine Brian standing on that wall, I see thousands and thousands of the young men who suffered and died in that war, which was meant to end all wars. I see also their mothers, their grandmothers, their sisters, their daughters, all the women and the family who suffer even more perhaps than the soldiers, standing behind him, saying, "Stop killing the kids." It's not just the civilian children who suffer in the wars, it's these young men and women who are sent to them. So he's standing in a very, very powerful, loving place on the side of this ancient hospital for mental illnesses. We're very, very grateful to the Tibetan Peace Garden to allow us to stand here and say these words about peace. And in a moment, a wonderful man, one of the guardians, is going to make a prayer for us. We're also very grateful to the Imperial War Museum, who've not protested or objected at all to us placing Brian here. I don't know, Caro is here, marvelous. Would you like to say a word? Caro Howell, the Director General of the Imperial War Museum. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, yes, I'm Caro. Thank you so much for inviting me to attend today. Brian dedicated a large proportion of his life to the campaign for peace during the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, as you know, between 2001 and 2011. His actions encouraged others to join him in raising awareness of the horrors of war and to persuade world leaders to choose alternative paths to conflict. It is fitting that a statue of such an influential campaigner for peace has been installed opposite the Imperial War Museum.
Bravo!
IWM exists to remind us of the causes, the course, and the consequences of war and its impact on people's lives. Since its foundation in 1917, IWM has explored conflict from different perspectives, including the ways that peace movements have influenced our perceptions of war. Alongside the stories of those who fought, our collections contain objects including handwritten records of conscription tribunals, white feather letters that were sent to men who weren't in uniform, and interviews with conscientious objectors from both world wars, members of organisations such as Peace Pledge Union and the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and the women protesters who camped outside the Greenham Common Air Base. This wealth of first-hand testimony enables us to provide a fully rounded picture of wartime experience. We hope that this memorial to Brian Hall, opposite IWM, will encourage people to explore these important stories of peace and their impact on British history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So where now? Why put a statue like this up in the streets? And where are we with all the different efforts to make a more peaceful world? CND, the Quakers, Peace Pledge Union, who give these white poppies for the remembrance of civilian casualties, and have done so since the end of the First World War. Peace Direct, which Dr. Cilla Elworthy founded, and Dylan is here as the director, who work for peaceful resolution of conflict throughout the world at a grassroots level. Peace One Day, Jeremy Gillies' organization that convinced the nations of the world to agree that there would be a recognizable day of peace, the 21st of September every year, rather than just the first Tuesday of the second week or wherever it used to be. And then has continued to fight for that day to be a day when we might have a unilateral ceasefire across all conflicts. Stop the War is here and has been here always. And Chris is going to come up and speak in a moment. Who else am I thinking of? Well, all the groups that are here, I welcome them very much well as individuals. As far as I know the story, there's a Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. Brian, as a very devout Catholic, is standing in the square. Maybe he's been there for a few years. And he notices the people coming out of Westminster Abbey and walking past him. And he notices, as often happens, that none of them stop. None of them come across. And he's thinking, I imagine, about his Christianity. And he'd been calling before that, stop killing the kids. And it was that evening that he had a revelation and changed it to stop killing our kids. Stop killing my kids. That the division he had in his mind, even after 7, 8 years on the streets, was still that there were those kids over there and there were my kids who are here today. And he changed and said, stop killing our kids, my kids. These kids are not different than our kids. If a parent kills a child to resolve an adult difference between them and their husband or their wife or their uncle or their granddad or some adult problem, do we stand for it?
No.
No. If in our streets we see someone kill a kid in order to get to work more quickly in their car or to resolve some conflict that's arisen between adults, do we stand for it?
No.
Do we stand for it in our schools? No. We still stand for children being beaten here, unlike the Irish and the Welsh and the Scots, I think. But we don't stand for killing of kids, and we generally don't stand for harming of them. Likewise in our churches, in our businesses. If the apprentices on the apprentice program, the English one, killed a child to get their objective, to make their profits, would we stand for it? Hell no.
No. Shame.
Hell no.
Shame.
We don't stand for it anywhere in our society because we're a good people and we love our children and we know our children are our future. Why the hell do we put up with it in international affairs? Put up with is an understatement. Why do we profit from it?
Yes.
Why do we sell arms to people who kill children to resolve their adult conflict? Did the children create that conflict? No. Why do we encourage them to seek justice through violent means, revenge, and policies that will harm and damage children? And I'm not just talking about the children harmed and damaged in the actual bomb blast or the bullet fire, but the kind of harm that was done to Brian himself, to discover your father hung because of the horrors of the violent, cruel, seditious attempts to resolve their conflicts, perceived conflicts that the Nazis felt they had. I hope and pray that there'll be a law one day, Brian's law, I would call it,
Yes, that will be wonderful.
and that it would be a law that any individual, any group, no matter what the excuse, no matter the justice or injustice that has inflamed it, if you kill or harm a child to resolve your conflict, your adult conflict, England will not stand with you. We won't supply your arms. We won't support you. We won't defend you. That's a line for us. That's a line we won't cross. So I'd love to invite up now some speakers to talk about Brian and where they are in our continuing efforts for peace. Chris, would you like to come first from Stop the War? Chris was arrested the other day as part of his peace protest in the street and faces trial you'll tell us what the accusation is, but it's getting much more difficult for people to stand. Someone asked me this morning, where would Brian be if he was here? And I said he'd be standing in Parliament Square, but he wouldn't. He'd be in prison if he stood in Parliament Square now. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I remember him sometimes on his own or with a few friends, but I also remember him surrounded by hundreds of people, including school kids who came out on strike on the day of the invasion. So with huge support, he did bravely and defiantly hold the space. And I think the truth is, the lesson today, the primary lesson has to be, we need that kind of commitment, and we need that kind of bravery, and we need that kind of defiance more than ever today. And I think Brian Hoare would be absolutely outraged to see the political situation we are in. Once again, we have a Labour government determined to militarise society, determined to fight more foreign wars, determined to send UK troops to Ukraine, determined to continue to fund Israel as it carries out a genocide, and in a sense, even more shockingly, determined to use this rhetoric of securitisation and the bogus threats of war as a way of attacking ordinary people in this country, as a way of cutting public services, and incredibly to penalise disabled people. I mean, this is not just about war, it's about the kind of values that we want our society to be dominated by. So I believe it's very, just to finish, I think it's very important that we do generate a very big movement against this militarisation and the kind of security rhetoric and so on and so forth, against the increase in arms spending, against foreign interventions, against the attacks on the public sector. We need a campaign for welfare, not warfare. We need a campaign that points out that every penny spent on arming foreign powers, spent on arming Israel, is a penny not spent on crumbling schools, on crumbling hospitals, on a social care system that is in complete disrepair. And I think that's got to be priority number one. I think we also need to continue the campaign over Palestine. We had a demonstration yesterday that was very big. It's an extraordinary, unprecedented movement, 25 national demonstrations, uncountable protests up and down the country. It's a fantastic movement. It needs to continue. But I just want to finally end by saying that the attacks on Brian and others at the time, that in terms of the right to protest and so forth, are now reaching quite critical levels. And they come sharpest against the Palestine movement, or also against, of course, the environmental movement. But what happened on January the 18th, where I was arrested, where Ben Jamal from PSC was arrested the next day, or was taken into a police station the next day, John McDonnell was taken into a police station, Jeremy Corbyn, now 7 other leaders of the movement have been taken in, including a Holocaust survivor, incredibly, for an entirely peaceful protest. This is a very, very serious attack, and one of the other things we need to do is to mount a very, very serious campaign now in defence of the right to protest, because although it's focused on 1 or 2 movements, it's a threat to us all. It's a new authoritarianism that is obviously combined with the push to war and the attacks at home, and it is an indication at one level they know they're unpopular, they know they're losing the argument across the board, therefore they are resorting to the more and more authoritarian types of policies. But it's still a threat, and it's still something we have to protest. Rights are never handed down. It was the Chartists, it was the suffragettes, it was the great social movements of the 60s and 70s that won us rights in the first place. We have to defend them once again today, and we should do so in Brian's memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, from Stop the War. There was a time when I was first involved in activism and protests, people would say, oh, who was there from the government? Oh, Jeremy and John were there. Yeah, they're always there. Who else? Anyone else? No. John McDonnell, one of the great campaigners for peace in our governance. Welcome. And a great friend of Brian's.
Thanks. Can I start off just by reminiscing, really? Because I miss him, and I miss Mike as well. When Brian first turned up in Parliament Square and ensconced himself outside of Parliament, a number of us, we had a wave of individual MPs going across to just see how he was, check out that he was safe and see if he needed anything. And it was me and Jeremy and Tony Benn and others would pop across.
Bravo!
Conversations with Brian were never short. So we'd spend some time there just talking through what the issues were, how we was. He basically was trying to ask us as well and advise us on the issues he wanted us to raise in Parliament itself. But the central message was straightforward: stop killing our children. And that was the message. And what happened is that he stood there to, the thing that Mark said, just to prick the consciences of MPs before they went into Parliament and into the chamber about this central issue. And that's why they got so angry with him, because I think he did prick their consciences, and it was about what they'd voted for, in particular the invasion of Iraq and how many had died and how many children had suffered in particular. And I think that's why they got so angry with him. Members of Parliament, there were so many issues at that time you could get angry about. But this really focused their anger on one man. And it was because he'd actually pricked their consciences in a way that they recognized what they'd done. And that's why they had to get rid of him. They could not cope with walking past him. And I was involved in all those debates. And some of the arguments were farcical about their historic medieval right to be able to have free movement into Parliament itself unobstructed. and then what happened is that, thanks to Mike and others, Brian's exhibition sort of developed, didn't it? It was organically grown. What cheered me up no end, if you remember, when, as Chris has said, they introduced the legislation to get rid of him. That bit, I think some of us had a sneaking suspicion they might have got the dates wrong, but we weren't going to tell them that. So when they realised that they'd screwed up, I roared with laughter, absolutely roared with laughter. We all did. But the other thing for me was, if you remember, the legislation put a limit, a sort of a circular limit around Parliament, 1 kilometre or whatever it was. So when Mark Wallinger reproduced the exhibition and put it in the Tate just outside the limit, and they actually then got nominated for the Turner Prize at one point. It cheered me up no end. And I was responsible for booking the rooms for Brian's press conferences and hosting them, and we had all sorts of trouble in negotiating that with the Sergeant at Arms, but we got it. So we'd bring Brian across in the old W rooms, we'd have a press conference or whatever, we'd take photographs. So Brian would then put photographs on the exhibition of the press conference of all who were there, basically say, these are the MPs and others who are supporting us. Well, those photographs became part of the exhibition. So I was telling my children and grandchildren, you're looking at a Turner Prize here. It was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. And I think what gained my admiration for Brian as well is that he was there when he was very ill. No matter what, he was there. I know he was tough. I know he was, because of his own life experiences. But actually, he was there through thick and thin, all weathers, all time. And he became an inspiration. He became an inspiration to MPs, to be honest. That turned, the atmosphere began to turn. People realised what his message was. It became an inspiration. Exactly as Chris said, we had school children trips to see Brian. He was becoming, he would be worried about this, he was becoming a national treasure if we weren't careful. But he got the message across, and he never let anyone go without that message. But the message moved on, exactly as Chris has said. The message was as well, I have a right to be here. I have a historic right to be here, to basically tell truth to power. Speak truth to power, that's what he was about. Yeah. So I agree with Chris, if he was here now, that's what his worry would be again. Where do we go from here? Let me just say very briefly where I think we need to go. An immediate issue. Over this next week, the government will publish its green paper on the reform in inverted commas, of the social security system with regard to disability and sickness. The proposals that have been brought forward are outrageous. They will force people into poverty. There's been such outrage, they're beginning to back off a bit, but not enough. And the reason they're doing it is to what? Is to fund the defence budget.
Shame!
So disabled people will suffer, and we've been campaigning on this for nearly 20 years. We had 600 suicides as a result of the last round of reforms on work capability assessments. There's a wonderful book by John Pring that denounces the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, as a killer department, because that's what it did. And this new wave of cuts will have the same implications for people who are disabled and sick. So it's important that, to be honest, we follow the example of Brian and rise up over these next few weeks to prevent that happening. This diversion of money from the poorest, the most disabled, into defence. But then there's the second issue as well, which is the longer term now and what we do. The point that Mark has made, it's a war crime to kill children in the way that they're being killed at the moment. The indiscriminate bombing in Gaza is a war crime. But we need to elaborate on what that means, because what we've got to do, exactly as Mara said, we need to start legislating now that we will not participate in anything that involves a risk to children in this way. There was a number of the peace organisations here, during the period when we were running up to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership election, etc. One of the proposals we were working on, I can see some of the faces, is that when we went into government, we wanted to convert the Ministry of Defence into a Ministry for Peace. So that we would, instead of spending money on weapon after weapon, the whole thrust of our policy, foreign policy, everything about security, would be about conflict prevention and conflict resolution. And we wanted to become the world leaders in that. And you know, it's doable. We saw it in South Africa, we saw that in Northern Ireland, the role that we could play across the globe in conflict prevention and conflict resolution. That's what we should be campaigning for now. And you know, there's a new wave building at the moment, particularly amongst young people. We've seen it in all the demonstrations that the Stop the War and others have organised so successfully. There's a new wave building about young people who are saying, we can't tolerate the world that we're inheriting from you. We want something different. Yes. And the ideas are beginning to flow again, to give people hope. And one of those campaigns has got to be around peace. So I want to ensure that we start thinking hard again now. How do we start stimulating debates in communities, then eventually into Parliament, about how we create a Ministry for Peace and how we become a country and a government that's the leading edge, the shining example of how you bring about peace and end wars altogether. That's the hope. And that's the hope that actually Brian Hoare inspired in so many of us. So that statue, as people go by it, they'll see it and they'll ask the question, who's that? And we'll be able to explain who it is. And you know, I haven't given up hope on a full-scale statue in Parliament Square.
Bravo, bravo.
Solidarity.
John, thank you so much. Our last speaker today is a woman who's inspired me as long as I've been conscious about peace and war, Dr. Scilla Elworthy. She led or created a group called the Oxford Research Group back, I think, in the 70s or 80s, was it, Scilla? And a lovely book came out of that work, 50 stories of the peaceful resolution of conflict. Incredible stories. A man called Henri, I remember, in the Congo, who needed 60 quid. 60 quid is all he needed. That was the taxi ride from his home to a little village where perhaps someone had been murdered. But now the families and the clans were deciding they were going to murder each other in revenge. Henri had the ability to get in a taxi, go into that village and talk with those people, talk them down from further murder as a way of getting justice in this situation and find a better way through words. He was an incredibly brave man. He was captured by warlords, I think, and taken into the jungle and survived that, and came out, even at the risk of his life, working peacefully to resolve conflict. So there is hope. There's evidence that this can work, that we don't need these arms to give us security. In fact, that's the last thing they're going to give us. So I'd like to invite Dr. Scilla Elworthy to the stage. She founded Peace Direct, if you're interested in her work, to continue this wonderful research.
Thank you. And thank you for gathering so many big hearts right here, right now. And it's on us that the future depends. And what I want to do is, in honoring this man, this incredible man, and just think about what cold he went through every night, what discomfort, what anguish, what fury he went through, and what can we do now? I want to try and concentrate for a moment or two on what is being done and what can be done. Two of the examples you'll know, and two you probably will not. You may remember Greenham Common. Yes. You may remember when thousands of us bundled our kids into buses and went to the gates of Greenham, not really knowing what we were going to do, but they said, bring your baby clothes. And when we tumbled out of the buses, we rushed up to the barbed wire and hung the baby clothes on the fence. That became a memorial for the rest of the year. And then we surrounded the base. We had no idea if we could mass enough arms to get round the whole thing. It was 13 miles perimeter. And we surrounded it, woman to woman, around the whole base. It was called Embrace the Base.
Beautiful, bravo, bravo.
So that's one example, and it traveled around the world. People in different countries come up to me and they say, Greenham, Greenham. So it worked because the missiles were eventually removed from Greenham Common.
Bravo.
So it's that kind of presence in the moment when there is violence, either in our neighborhood or in the city or in our country or in behalf of our country. We need, each one of us, to think, what can I do? So I want to ask everybody right now to take just a moment, close your eyes, put your hand on your heart, and just contemplate, what can I do? You don't have to have the answer now, but it really matters. It matters who you speak to tomorrow. It matters what you not just write a letter to your MP, but go and see them. It matters what you pin your colours to. It matters who you talk to in your neighbourhood. But more than anything else, it matters how we get together. How we actually find this gathering in our neighbourhood and give the people in that neighbourhood a clear pattern of what needs to be done. It may be massing together, it may be marching, it may be taking a storm on Parliament, it may be prayer. But it's now we have to take action, because it's getting worse. As other speakers have pointed out, it's getting worse every day. And it's time now. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our friends, our families, our communities, this community which is formed and will remain in our memories for this day, all the way through. I have a friend who's read all of Tolstoy, and I said, what did Tolstoy feel? What do you think? And he said Tolstoy came to believe that the only revolutionary act In fact, the only real revolutionary act possible for a human being is to forgive your enemies. So that disconnect that modern culture puts onto us with technology, which promises to connect us but keeps us so separate, is important in our peace campaigns, in our connection of peace communities in a day like this. It's also important in that ultimate separation between us and someone else when we hate them or we consider them to be an enemy. A powerful thought. So we've come to, what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask Lalung Dharma to come and make a prayer for Brian and for us. And then we'll cross over to unveil the statue. Our proposal is that all of us stand on this side of the pavement, looking across the street at the statue, and then we have and then Brian's family are going to unveil it for us. You can see now, if you look, there's Jenny Termani's put out refreshments. They're waiting for the refreshments, and there's also an exhibition in just inside the School of Historical Dress of T-shirts and pictures of Brian's protest. If you can't get in today, come back. It'll be open for a week and it'll be free. I think that's all I need to say. The books are there. The pins are here. Do tell people about it. So, Lalung. Lalung is one of the guardians of the Tibetan Peace Garden.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me here to say the prayers for all the people who have suffered through the war. And on the way here, I wrote a poem about Brian's statue and what it represents. And it's in Tibetan, so I can't, should I read in Tibetan or trying to translate? Tibetan, okay. Tirab Niji Sai Kolander, Gedan Jehab Hangsim Wandusum, Niemen Romang, Tome Teso Shur, Dila Misu Pao Brian Da. Minam Tamche Gedun Konar Zu Brian Kongni Jila Shide Zu Kazan member Long Juniewe Jozo Tangchu Gawa Jenin Be Jambe Semje Moju Kobe Tap Rangi Mize Zamni Shidele Nindo Chimbe Lodong Chegenchu Tiram Di Bao Chemin Su Tirinimo Chuji Kunrandi Chuji Tsabdun Zamni 친왕군 시대 꿀외 전된 전부 때 따도 제라 전쟁 구조 제. So basically saying that four stanzas in there, and that firstly saying the greedies of the individuals and also governments that causing wars and going for the wars. And because of that, many innocent people are dying and killed. So the Brian can't just stay there to watch what's happening. He came up to protest, to stop the war. That's it. And this time that many people there were fighting for individual rights, but Brian fight for right for every beings for world peace, and not only from the mouth words for fighting. He actually fought for until his death at a Parliament Square, calling for world peace, and through the loving compassion, he's trying to stop the wars around the world. He dedicated his life for the world peace with a brave and brave and giving his life. And therefore, if you are not a hero of the world, then who could be? So today we are putting up your statue here in near the Peace Garden as a representative of yourself, and this will remind all the people here on the earth to work for world peace, that sort of thing. And actually, properly translated, I will pass on you next day. And I do short prayer here. It's to pray for the entire sentient beings. Okay. Changju semcho rinpo che ma che pa na ma che juro che wa nyang pa me pa ya gong ni gong du pe wa ra sho pa ma sim che tam che de da den juro che ngen zhuo tam che da do dong wa da Changju sempo gang na su shu pa de da guen jie me la zhu juro chi. We have a peace house in North Haru. Our peace garden is here. It's quite a distance, and I'm trying to build a peace foundation. We have a project called Shide Peace Project, and it's going. I'm working on it, and it's to bring world peace. And at the moment, currently, we are talking to students who come to our center, and each time 80, 120 students they come, and I trying to teach them what is the most important in our life, their life, and we will continue like that. Thank you.
So I think we're full of Brian's spirit now. Full of the spirit of all the campaigners for peace, which he so bravely represented. Let's take that spirit over to the street, and hopefully you'll agree that the bronze statue that Amanda made is a suitable remembrance. So we'll move to the pavement now. Thank you so much for your attention. Are we ready? No? So we're going to unveil this statue to Brian Hall. Many thanks to all who've made it happen. If you ever want a project manager, Jen Kavanagh's the one. She project managed for us. Jenny Tiramani and all her volunteers have created this beautiful railing in the situation and given that to us for free. Thanks to them. The School of Historical Dress. The establishment said he was mad. But for 11 years, day and night, summer and winter, he stood outside Parliament and protested against wars that are destroying generations of children born and unborn. We marched and went home. He stood defiant, inspiring us until he died. This statue is in loving memory of Brian Hall and all civilians and armed personnel who suffer and were cared for in buildings. I'd like to invite a child to come and untie the ribbon that closes the gates. Leo, would you come across with your mum and help us? There, you made it across the traffic. Leo representing all the children that Brian stood for to defend in his life. Hooray! Well done. I'd like to invite Peter and Rob and Maria, Brian Hall's children, 3 of his 7 children, and indeed his grandchildren, if they want to come too, to come and unveil the statue for us, please. The words on the front, "Stop killing the kids." Words underneath defining him. Also a plaque on the railing that has a QR code, whatever they're called, that leads you to the website, where all the names of people who supported us and many other ideas are there for the young people, for anyone to get engaged. Do come across very safely and have a look. There's refreshments, there's an exhibition in the School of Historical Dress. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Peace and love.
Never die. So many times. But he is policeman.
Go a little bit to your left first, just so you can see the words. Yeah, he's a peace activist. Apache. Apache. Yeah. Oh, he's very happy about Brian Moore being here. Aren't you, boy? Yeah. Aren't you, boy? Good boy. Down we go.
Good to see you again, Mark.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. The event was beautiful.